It was an ordinary house filled with a lifetime of memories, until the day its owner put up the "for sale" sign without warning her family. What drove her to such a shocking choice stunned everyone who knew her. Martha Johnson woke before her alarm, just as the faintest gray crept across the ceiling of her suburban ranch house. It was the house she'd lived in for almost 40 years, tucked away at the end of Willow Lane in a town where everyone seemed to know her name. The old wooden floors creaked as she sat up, reminding her, like a gentle nudge, that every room in this house remembered her family's footsteps. She took a breath and caught the familiar scent of coffee grounds from the kitchen. Her hand reached automatically for the well-worn robe hanging on the closet door. She moved quietly down the hallway, passing the family photo wall, rows of framed smiles and Christmas mornings, prom nights and birthday parties, Polaroids and faded school portraits. She paused at the most recent photo of her grandkids, taken last Thanksgiving. Ethan and Lily had insisted on silly faces, and Martha's daughter, Sarah, was laughing in the background, trying to wrangle them into one last, serious shot. Martha straightened the frame with her knuckle and allowed herself a brief smile. In the kitchen, sunlight filtered through the half-closed blinds, catching on the dust motes floating in the air. Martha filled the coffee pot, checked the calendar on the fridge, and listened for the sound of the mail truck. Wednesdays meant a busy morning, trash to take out, a plumber scheduled for the leaky sink, and her neighbor Alice was dropping by with zucchini bread. She wrote out a to-do list, her pen looping in her neat cursive, old habits from her teaching days that never left. She carried her coffee to the back porch and opened the door to the garden, where tulips and daffodils lined the fence. The swing creaked gently as she sat down. Across the yard stood the old oak tree, planted the year Sarah was born. Every spring, Sarah used to climb up and tape ribbons to the branches, and even now, in her 40s, she'd insist on hanging bird feeders there with Martha's help. The garden needed weeding, and the shed door had started to sag, but Martha was proud of this patch of earth. She'd built the raised beds with her late husband, Harold, spending whole weekends digging, laughing, getting sunburned together. She ran her fingers along the railing, remembering the years of backyard cookouts, children chasing fireflies, neighbors dropping in with potato salad, country music playing low from radio. The porch boards were worn smooth by countless evenings just like this. A sudden clatter from the front broke her reverie. She hurried through the house to the front door and found a stack of envelopes on the mat. Bills, a card from her church group, a real estate flyer with glossy pictures of modern luxury homes. She tossed the flyer aside, shaking her head. "They'll never stop trying to buy this place out from under me," she muttered, recalling how often realtors had knocked, asking if she was ready to downsize. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was Sarah. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Can we stop by this weekend? The kids miss you." Martha smiled, typing back, "Of course. I'll bake something special." The house always felt fullest when her grandchildren were there. Legos on the rug, muddy shoes by the back door, laughter echoing up the hallway. For a moment, her heart lifted. But then her eyes landed on the stack of unpaid medical bills on the kitchen table. She tried not to let her smile fade. Instead, she set about her chores, hauling the trash cans to the curb, sweeping the front walk, and taking a quick inventory of what needed fixing before the plumber arrived. The air was crisp, the kind of late spring day that made her joints ache less, and she took comfort in the small rituals, watering the begonias, shaking out the welcome mat, trimming the hedges. She waved to Alice next door, who shouted that she'd bring over bread by noon. Inside, she started sorting through a box of old keepsakes for the church rummage sale. Harold's baseball mitt, Sarah's first baby shoes, a stack of postcards from a cross-country road trip Martha had taken in her 20s. Each object tugged at a different memory, a different version of her family. She carefully wrapped up a set of porcelain figurines, her mother's, inherited decades ago and never once moved from the mantel. At noon, Alice arrived with still warm bread and news from around the neighborhood. The conversation was bright and easy, filled with the kind of simple complaints and laughter that longtime friends shared. They talked about the rising cost of groceries, the latest church fundraiser, and whether the Johnson house down the block was really going up for sale. After Alice left, Martha made lunch and sat at the kitchen table, tracing the wood grain with her fingertip. She found herself thinking about the many voices that had once filled this house, and about how, over the years, they'd grown quieter, then faded away. A car horn startled her, just the mailman again. She sighed, folded her napkin, and started making a mental list of things she needed from the store. The old house felt both too big and too small all at once. It had become a kind of museum for memories. Every room, every crack in the paint, held a story. Martha knew, deep down, that it was more than just a house. It was her whole life, layer upon layer, year upon year, love and loss and everything in between. But that afternoon, as she dusted the living room shelves, the phone rang again. The plumber was running late. Alice texted to say she'd forgotten her umbrella and would swing by again soon. Martha set another place at the table, just in case. And the house, as always, waited quietly, holding its breath, as if it too knew that everything could change in a single ordinary day. The rest of Martha's afternoon was a flurry of small interruptions. After the plumber finally arrived, an hour behind schedule, apologizing profusely, Martha followed him from sink to basement, explaining where the pipes ran, where the leak had first appeared, and how Harold used to handle all the home repairs himself. The plumber, a young man named Jake, nodded politely but seemed eager to finish. While he worked, Martha stayed close, making small talk and offering coffee, watching as he knelt among the dust and spiderwebs. When Jake finally declared the job finished, Martha wrote him a check and tucked the receipt into a folder already stuffed with household paperwork. "You never know when you'll need a record," she said to herself. She walked him out, pausing to water the marigolds on the front porch as he drove away. The day had grown warmer, and the hum of lawnmowers filled the neighborhood air. Back inside, she made herself a glass of iced tea and settled in the living room to rest her aching feet. The house was quiet again, but not for long. At 3:30, someone knocked, 3 brisk raps on the door. Martha peered through the peephole. It was a man in a crisp shirt, tie, and an oversized smile, holding a leather folder. She opened the door a crack, chain still latched. "Can I help you?" "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name's Tyler Briggs, with Willow Realty Group. Sorry to bother you, but we're in the neighborhood looking for homeowners who might be interested in selling. The market's never been hotter. Did you know the Johnsons just down the street got an offer 10% over asking?" Martha's face tightened, but she kept her voice polite. "Thank you, but I'm not interested." Of course. But if you ever change your mind," he slipped a glossy business card through the door and retreated down the steps, already dialing someone else on his phone. Annoyed, Martha tossed the card onto the growing pile of real estate flyers and shook her head. They never gave up. It felt like every week someone new showed up, each pitch more eager than the last. Sometimes they even sent letters addressed to current resident, promising quick cash, fast closings, even moving help. No sooner had she sat back down than the phone rang. The church's charity coordinator was on the line, asking if she'd be able to help sort donations this weekend. Martha hesitated. She always volunteered, but her knees had been bothering her lately. Still, she agreed. After she hung up, she wrote a note on her calendar and sighed. The calendar, once packed with family events, now overflowed with appointments, reminders, and the names of people she saw only occasionally. A few minutes later, Alice returned for her umbrella. She brought gossip about the neighbors, whose son was coming home from college, who had bought a new car, who might be getting divorced. Martha listened, nodded, and offered her a slice of banana bread, grateful for the company even as the stories sometimes blurred together. After Alice left, Martha headed to the spare bedroom to sort more boxes for the rummage sale. She opened a dusty trunk and found old quilts, high school yearbooks, a broken lamp Harold had always meant to fix. In the bottom of the trunk was a box marked, "Sarah, do not throw away." It was filled with childhood treasures, a Girl Scout sash, trophies, crayon drawings, birthday cards with glitter and awkward handwriting. Martha traced the edge of a faded valentine and remembered Sarah running through the house, pigtails flying. She set the box aside, determined to ask Sarah if she wanted it when she visited next. A pang of longing twisted in her chest. Sometimes, even with all the memories packed into this house, she felt like a visitor herself, like the life she'd built was slowly slipping out of reach, replaced by boxes, bills, and the relentless march of strangers at the door. That evening, as the sun slipped below the rooftops and painted the living room gold, Martha reheated leftovers and watched an old sitcom on TV. Outside, the neighborhood quieted. Children called in for dinner, sprinklers whirred, porch lights flickered on one by one. She washed her plate, turned off the lights, and climbed the creaking stairs to her bedroom. Before bed, she stood at the window, looking out over the darkened street. She could see her garden, the faint shape of the oak tree, the lights from Alice's kitchen across the way. Martha pressed her hand against the cool glass, her heart heavy with memories and the stubborn weight of everything the house still meant. Downstairs, the house settled, floorboards sighing. Tomorrow would bring another day, more tasks, more unexpected visitors. For now, Martha pulled the covers to her chin, closed her eyes, and tried to remember the sound of her family filling every room. Voices, laughter, footsteps, all woven into the bones of the place she called home. The next morning, Martha woke to the sound of rain tapping against her bedroom window. She lay there for a few moments, staring up at the pale ceiling, listening as the gentle patter grew louder. She tried to remember the last time she'd slept through the night. The old house had a way of waking her with every groan, every distant car, every flash of light from the street. Downstairs, she found the kitchen colder than usual, the smell of last night's coffee still lingering in the air. She poured herself a cup, reheated it in the microwave, and stood at the sink watching the rivulets of water snake down the window. Her phone buzzed on the table, another text from Sarah, this time short and hurried. "Sorry, Mom. Can't make it this weekend after all. Work's crazy. Love you." Martha's fingers tightened around the mug. She typed back, "No worries. Stay warm." She didn't bother asking when she'd see them next. She'd learned not to push. The last time she'd mentioned how empty the house felt, Sarah had snapped at her for guilt-tripping. It stung, even days later. She turned on the local news for background noise and went about her chores. The kitchen faucet still dripped, despite yesterday's repair. The living room carpet needed vacuuming, and a stack of bills waited on the hall table. There was a letter from the insurance company, a property tax notice, and another offer from a real estate agent she'd never met. By mid-morning, Martha's brother, Ray, called. His voice was gravelly from years of cigarettes, but he always managed a joke or two. "Hey, kiddo. You surviving out there? Alice tells me you're famous for your banana bread now." She smiled. "I'll save you a slice if you ever bother to visit." They traded small talk, weather, old friends, news from their hometown back in Iowa. Ray hinted at money troubles, which he always did, and Martha promised to send him some of the tomatoes she'd been canning. After they hung up, she felt both comforted and somehow lonelier than before. Even family, she realized, had become something filtered through screens and static. The rain let up by noon, so Martha pulled on her boots and walked out to check the mailbox. The air smelled of wet earth and cut grass. A car slowed as it passed, the driver, one of the new neighbors, waving politely. Martha waved back, remembering a time when she knew every family on the block by name. Most had moved away. The Johnson house had been rented out to college students, who threw noisy parties and never shoveled the walk. Across the street, the Hanleys' old place was empty now, the "For Sale" sign drooping in the mud. She picked up her mail, more bills, a catalog, and a card from her church. On the way back to the house, she stopped to pull a few weeds from the garden bed and propped up a fallen daffodil. Inside, she paused at the hall closet and pulled out a battered photo album. After lunch, she sat in her favorite chair by the window, thumbing through page after page of snapshots. Harold on the porch with a paper, Sarah blowing out birthday candles, Ray at his army graduation. She let the hours drift by, lost in the past. When the phone rang again, it startled her. It was Mrs. Preston from her church, inviting her to Bible study that evening. Martha declined, saying she was too tired, though the truth was she didn't want to leave the house. Afternoon faded into evening, the clouds outside tinged pink and gold. She reheated soup for dinner and ate by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Just before dusk, she heard voices in the yard and peered through the curtains, kids from the neighborhood, cutting through on their bikes. One of them knocked over her garden gnome and sped off laughing. Martha went out to set it upright. She lingered in the yard a long while, staring at the rows of tulips, at the empty driveway, at the darkening sky overhead. When she finally went back inside, she locked every door, checked every window, then stood in the living room, feeling the emptiness pressing in around her. Before bed, she phoned Alice just to say good night, and listened to her friend complain about the weather, about her son's new girlfriend, about how the world was changing faster than she could keep up. Martha agreed, because what else was there to say? That night, as she lay in bed listening to the rain begin again, Martha tried to remember the last time she'd felt the house was truly hers, and wondered, not for the first time, what she would do if things ever changed. Saturday morning dawned gray and humid. Martha woke to the sound of the neighbor's dog barking and the steady drip from the kitchen faucet, which had started up again during the night. She shuffled to the bathroom, splashed water on her face, and glanced at herself in the mirror, a new wrinkle at the corner of her mouth, a strand of gray hair escaping her bun. She let out a sigh and made her way to the kitchen, her slippers brushing over the faded linoleum. On the counter sat the stack of bills she'd avoided all week. She gathered them up and carried them to the small desk in the den. With her reading glasses perched low on her nose, she opened each envelope, one by one. Gas bill, electric, a new statement from the hospital, an overdue notice for the property tax. The numbers made her heart flutter, and she wrote out checks slowly, her hand trembling just a bit. The phone rang before she could finish. It was Alice again, inviting Martha to the farmer's market. "I'll drive. It's senior discount day and the peaches are supposed to be perfect," Alice insisted. Martha hesitated. The idea of seeing friendly faces, maybe running into old acquaintances, was appealing, but the bills on the desk were a stubborn reminder of everything else pressing in. Still, she agreed, and by 10 a.m., she was waiting at the curb, purse in hand, watching for Alice's blue Buick. The market was bustling. Children darted between stalls, vendors shouted over the crowd, and the scent of kettle corn mingled with fresh basil. Martha let Alice lead her from table to table, homemade jams, wildflower bouquets, baskets of ripe tomatoes. They ran into Janet from church, who boasted about her granddaughter's scholarship, and Ernie, whose arthritis had kept him off the golf course all spring. Alice bought a loaf of sourdough and convinced Martha to try a wedge of sharp cheddar from a local dairy. As they sampled strawberries, Alice leaned in, lowering her voice. "Did you see that sign in your yard yesterday? Some realty company put it there while you were out. I pulled it up, don't worry. But they're getting bolder." Martha frowned, her mood souring. "I keep telling them I'm not selling. This is my home. What is wrong with people?" Alice squeezed her hand. "They're just greedy. Ignore them." Back at home, Martha stowed away her groceries and returned to her chores. The leaky faucet demanded attention. She crawled under the sink with a wrench and an old rag, remembering how Harold used to joke that plumbing was half luck, half curse words. She managed to tighten a loose fitting, but water still dribbled onto her sleeve. Frustrated, she made a note to call the plumber again next week. In the afternoon, Sarah called. Her voice was distant, distracted. "Mom, sorry again about last weekend. Work's been nuts. Listen, I wanted to ask, did you ever find that old photo album with the Disney trip pictures? Ethan's got a school project." Martha brightened at the thought of her grandson. "Of course, honey. I'll look tonight and set it aside for you." "Thanks, Mom. And, are you doing okay? Need anything?" Martha wanted to say yes, to list every little ache and anxiety. But instead she replied, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just the usual stuff. Don't worry about me." Sarah was already saying goodbye, promising to try and visit, maybe next month. The call ended, and the house fell silent once more. That evening, Martha found the photo album in a box marked Vacations. She flipped through page after page, Sarah as a little girl, Harold in his favorite baseball cap, Martha herself sunburned and smiling beside the teacups ride. Her eyes misted as she set the album on the hall table, ready for whenever Sarah might actually stop by. Later, Alice called again. She'd forgotten her peaches at Martha's. Could she come by? They sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, watching dusk settle over the garden. Alice talked about her daughter's troubles, about Medicare, about a leak in her own roof. For a while, the world felt manageable again, two old friends sharing small comforts in a house that, for tonight, felt less empty. After Alice left, Martha walked through each room, checking windows, straightening cushions, turning off lights. In the quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong. She paused at the front door, listening to the night sounds outside, feeling the weight of the house and the memories it contained. Then she climbed the stairs and settled into bed, the ache in her joints softened by the warmth of her covers, the old familiar hope that tomorrow might bring something better. Sunday started with sunlight pouring through the bedroom curtains, but Martha awoke tense, her mind already racing. There was too much to do. After a restless night, she moved stiffly down the hallway, her slippers silent against the wood floors, and paused at the thermostat. Already the heat was creeping in, another bill to worry about. She turned it down, reminding herself to use the fan instead. Downstairs, the kitchen radio was set to the oldies station, The cheerful voices of the morning hosts a stark contrast to the growing stack of mail. Martha poured herself a mug of coffee, cradling it in her hands as she stared out the window. In the yard, a squirrel darted across the fence, scattering the robins. She forced herself to smile and stepped outside, breathing in the fresh morning air. By mid-morning, the quiet was broken by the sound of an engine idling out front. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. A silver SUV sat in the driveway, her nephew Tommy's car. Tommy appeared at the door with his girlfriend, a young woman Martha had only met once at Thanksgiving. They were both dressed for the city, Tommy in a pressed shirt, his girlfriend in trendy sunglasses, scrolling through her phone. "Hi, Aunt Martha." Tommy grinned, holding up a bag of donuts. "Thought we'd surprise you. Brought breakfast." The kitchen filled with chatter and the smell of sugar. Tommy talked about his new job in Denver, how expensive everything had gotten, how he wished his mom, Martha's late sister, could see him now. His girlfriend, Jess, asked to use the Wi-Fi and complimented Martha's garden in the same breath. It was warm, noisy, almost like the old days. But after the coffee and donuts, the conversation turned. Tommy asked about the house, how Martha was managing, if she'd considered all the offers out there. Jess chimed in, telling Martha about friends who'd moved into new condos with zero maintenance, everything included. Tommy mentioned casually that if Martha ever decided to sell, she could travel, see the grandkids more, maybe even come out west for a while. Martha stiffened, her smile faltering. "I appreciate the advice, but this is my home. I'm not ready for anything else." Tommy nodded, his face falling a little. "Of course, Aunt Martha. Just want you to be happy." Soon, Tommy announced they had to run, brunch plans downtown, traffic would be bad. They left as quickly as they'd arrived, the kitchen suddenly echoing with silence. Martha stood by the door, watching the SUV back out, feeling an ache deep in her chest. She gathered up the empty cups, wiped the counter, and set the bag of leftover donuts on the table for Alice. In the afternoon, the sky clouded over. Martha decided to tackle the attic, something she'd been putting off for years. She pulled down the folding stairs and climbed up, flashlight in hand, dust swirling in the beam. Boxes lined the walls, marked with years and names. Christmas decorations, Harold's Army memorabilia, Sarah's baby clothes. In one corner, Martha found a trunk she hadn't opened since her husband died. Inside, she discovered a stack of letters in Harold's handwriting, yellowed with age, tied with a faded blue ribbon. She sat on an old camp chair and read for nearly an hour, letters from Harold during his time overseas, from Martha's parents in Ohio, from Sarah at summer camp. Each page brought back the taste of forgotten summers, the weight of old fears, the sweetness of a life that felt, in moments like these, both impossibly distant and heartbreakingly close. As a storm rolled in outside, rain pattered on the roof and thunder shook the rafters. Martha closed the trunk, wiping her eyes, and carried a handful of keepsakes downstairs. The house felt especially large that evening, echoing with the storm's rumble, shadows shifting in every room. Martha made herself soup and ate it in silence, the only sound the wind rattling the kitchen window. Before bed, she called Alice to check in. The two friends talked about the storm, shared memories of their husbands fixing leaks and patching roofs. Alice joked that they ought to run away to Florida, where the only storms are on TV. Martha laughed, a real laugh, surprised by its strength, and for a little while, the house felt safe again. Later, as she walked the halls, turning off lights, Martha's thoughts churned, about the house, the memories packed into every room, the pressures from outside and even from family. She paused at the staircase, listening to the storm fade, and wondered, just for tonight, if she might be able to rest easy, knowing she was still in control of her own story. Martha awoke Monday to a chorus of birds outside her window and a headache pulsing at her temples. The storm had passed but left behind fallen branches and wet leaves scattered across the yard. She pulled on a sweater and went out with her rake, shuffling through puddles, gathering debris, and straightening the row of solar lights that lined the walkway. Halfway through the work, the mail carrier approached. "Morning, Mrs. Johnson," he called, holding out a bundle of envelopes and a small package. "Looks like you got a care package." Martha thanked him, recognizing her sister-in-law's handwriting on the box. Inside, she found homemade cookies, a crossword book, and a note that read, "Don't let anyone push you around. This house is your kingdom." Martha smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude. As she set the cookies on the counter, the phone rang. It was Pastor Lewis from the church, calling to remind her about the Wednesday lunch for seniors and gently suggesting she attend. "We all miss seeing you, Martha. The house can't be good for your spirits, rattling around in there all by yourself." She bristled but kept her voice polite. "Thank you, Pastor. I'll think about it." She made a mental note to send a check for the church's food drive. Money was tight, but giving always gave her purpose. Later, she sat down at the kitchen table to sort through her bills and calendar. The previous week's plumbing fix had cost more than expected, and the property tax was due soon. She ran the numbers in her checkbook again, each total adding another layer of worry. A robocall interrupted her train of thought, the familiar, chirpy voice. "Hello. Are you the homeowner? We have an exciting offer. Sell your home in just 7 days, no repairs necessary." Martha hung up, pressing her lips together, then stood abruptly and decided to bake something. The act of measuring flour and sugar, cracking eggs, folding batter, filled the kitchen with warmth and distraction. While the cinnamon bread baked, she listened to the local talk radio show, where callers complained about everything from potholes to the price of eggs. Just as she pulled the bread from the oven, there was another knock at the door. This time it was her cousin Lorraine, who lived across town. Lorraine swept in, smelling of strong perfume and speaking in a rapid-fire stream. She barely paused to take off her coat before launching into her usual worries: her son's divorce, her roof leaking, her frustration with her doctor. Martha served tea and cinnamon bread. Lorraine complimented the house, then leaned in, dropping her voice. "Martha, have you ever considered moving to that new retirement community? It's so modern, all-inclusive, and you wouldn't have to lift a finger. I heard they're offering great deals for early sign-ups. Just think about it. You'd have friends around all the time." Martha forced a smile and shook her head. "This house is full of friends, if you count all the memories." Lorraine laughed but looked unconvinced. The conversation shifted. Martha showed Lorraine the trunk of keepsakes she'd brought down from the attic, and together they laughed over old photos, stories about Harold's stubbornness, and a disastrous family Thanksgiving where someone had dropped the turkey. For a while, the worries faded. But after Lorraine left, promising to call again soon, Martha found herself pacing the kitchen, unsettled. It seemed everyone had advice: downsize, move, sell, start over. Even the house itself whispered reminders of all the things left undone: a squeaky step, a missing shingle, the leak under the sink. As evening settled, Martha found herself at the piano in the living room, running her fingers over the keys. She played a slow, gentle melody, one Harold used to love. The notes echoed through the empty house, each one a reminder of what had been and what was still hers. She closed the lid, wiped away a tear, and sat for a long time in the quiet, watching the golden light fade from the garden outside. Tuesday dawned muggy, with sunlight filtering through the haze. Martha rose early, plagued by uneasy dreams she couldn't quite remember. She put on her oldest jeans and sneakers and decided she'd tackle the garage, a job she'd avoided for years. The side door stuck as she pushed it open, the hinges groaning their protest. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old lawn fertilizer and motor oil. Boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling: holiday decorations, canning jars, Harold's fishing rods, Sarah's roller skates, a jumble of tools she hadn't used since her husband died. Martha spent hours sorting through it all, hauling out bags of trash and a pile of recycling. By mid-morning, sweat beaded on her brow and her knees ached, but she pressed on, determined to reclaim the space. Halfway through, she discovered a box labeled, "Yard Sale, Do Not Touch." Curiosity piqued, Martha opened it to find items she'd meant to get rid of years ago: chipped mugs, extra curtains, a half-working radio, and a collection of VHS tapes. She set aside a few things for the church rummage sale and decided to give the radio one last try. After fiddling with the dial, it sputtered to life with a burst of static and tinny music. Martha smiled. Sometimes the old things still worked, even when you thought they were long gone. As she sorted, Martha heard a car pull into the driveway. She wiped her hands and went to investigate, finding a sleek sedan with tinted windows idling at the curb. A woman in a sharp suit emerged, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Rachel from Willow Lane Realty," she called, waving with practiced cheerfulness. "I wanted to see if you might be willing to talk about selling your house. We have buyers lined up, top-dollar, cash offers." Martha drew herself up, sweat-soaked and tired but defiant. "I've told you people 100 times, I'm not interested. This is my home." Rachel's smile flickered. "Of course, I understand. But if you reconsider, please call. Offers like this don't last." She handed Martha yet another glossy card and left with a quick, apologetic nod. The encounter left Martha rattled. She sat on the front steps for a while, letting her heart beat slow. The parade of realtors, callers, and friendly advice had become a constant drumbeat. Even on her own property, she felt watched, under siege. It was as if the world couldn't accept that she just wanted to stay put. Trying to shake off the feeling, Martha finished clearing the garage and made herself lunch, a turkey sandwich, a pickle, and a glass of iced tea. She ate on the back porch, legs propped on a faded plastic chair, watching bees buzz through the flowers. For a little while, the peace returned. The garden was wild but beautiful, red poppies and purple irises crowding the fence line. She resolved to clip some of the flowers for the dining table. The afternoon brought a different kind of visit. Ethan, her grandson, called from his mom's phone. His voice was shy but hopeful. "Grandma, can I ask you something for my school project? I have to write about our family's history." Martha's heart warmed. She told Ethan about the house, about Harold and the summer picnics, about Sarah's childhood games. They laughed as she described her own first job at the soda fountain and a camping trip where a raccoon stole their food. When the call ended, Martha felt lighter, as if some of the loneliness had lifted. Later, she spent time in the garden, pulling weeds and trimming back the roses. She found a robin's nest hidden deep in the hedge, 3 blue eggs nestled inside. Martha marveled at the tiny life quietly growing, safe in its hidden spot, and whispered a prayer for its safety. In the evening, Martha showered, put on her softest nightgown, and ate leftover soup while watching the local news. Another letter from a real estate company was slipped under her door after dark, this time a glossy brochure with photos of young, smiling families and promises of a fresh start. Martha tore it in half and tossed it in the bin. Before bed, she walked from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, straightening cushions, turning off lights. In the quiet, the house hummed with memories, some sad, some sweet, all hers. Martha paused by the living room window, looking out at the shadows in the yard. The neighborhood was changing, and the pressure around her was mounting, but tonight her home still belonged to her. She whispered good night to the old house, climbed the stairs, and settled under her quilt, listening to the peaceful thrum of crickets and the familiar creaks of the place she had always called home. Wednesday dawned bright and clear, with birdsong drifting through Martha's window. She woke feeling unusually light, as though the oppressive weight of recent weeks had lifted a little overnight. The scent of coffee brewing in the kitchen mingled with the smell of sun-warmed grass as she stepped onto the porch, mug in hand. Across the street, Alice waved from her own garden, a trowel in one hand and her cell phone in the other. After breakfast, Martha dressed in her favorite blouse and khaki slacks, determined to face the day. There was still plenty to do, the leaky faucet, a grocery run, church lunch at noon, but today she felt up for it. She gathered up a bag of groceries for the food pantry, tucked the photo album for Sarah under her arm, and locked the door behind her. The church hall was already bustling when Martha arrived, filled with voices and the warm smells of casserole and apple pie. She greeted old friends, exchanged hugs, and set her donation bag on the collection table. The lunch was noisy and cheerful, full of the kind of small talk and laughter she'd missed. Someone asked her to lead the blessing, and though her voice trembled at first, Martha found herself smiling as she spoke. After lunch, as she prepared to leave, Pastor Lewis stopped her by the door. "Martha, it's always a joy to see you here. If you ever need anything at all, you know you can count on us." She thanked him, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. The drive home was slow and pleasant, the radio playing a song she remembered from her first dance with Harold. Back at the house, Martha spent the afternoon baking a pie for Alice and calling Ray to check in. She dusted the living room, opened the windows, and let the soft breeze chase out the stale air. The house felt lighter, too, almost as if it had been waiting for her to reclaim it. In the late afternoon, Sarah finally arrived, Ethan and Lily tumbling out of the car with their backpacks. Sarah looked tired but happy to be home. She hugged her mother tightly in the driveway. "Sorry, Mom, for being so distant. I should have called more." Martha held her close, the past week's loneliness melting away for a moment. Inside, she brewed fresh coffee, set out cookies, and watched as the grandchildren ran from room to room, laughing and calling out for her to find their old toys. The house was suddenly alive again, every corner echoing with voices and energy. They spent the evening going through old photos, retelling stories, and playing board games at the kitchen table. Sarah asked about the bills and the real estate flyers. Martha shrugged, determined not to let the talk of selling ruin their time together. Later, as Sarah tucked the children into bed in the guest room, Martha lingered in the hallway, listening to the laughter, feeling the familiar pang of both joy and sadness. As night fell, Sarah joined her mother on the porch. For a while, neither spoke. The air was cool and fragrant, and the sounds of the neighborhood, crickets, distant car radios, the low hum of conversation, drifted around them. Finally, Sarah turned to Martha. "Mom, if you ever want to move, if it's ever too much, just say so. But I want you to know, I understand why you love this place. I do. It's not just a house." Martha reached over and took her daughter's hand. "It's everything. Your father built that fence, you planted those tulips. Every memory I have is right here. I'm not ready to let go. Not yet." Sarah nodded, squeezing her hand. "Then let's make some more memories, while we still can." That night, the house was quieter, but the emptiness was gone. As Martha walked through each room, she felt the warmth of family lingering in the air. She tidied the living room, folded a stray blanket, and placed the photo album back on the shelf. In her bedroom, she opened the window and listened to the night sounds, a soft smile on her lips. For the first time in weeks, Martha slept deeply. And in the morning, as sunlight filled the house again, she knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what the future brought, she would always have a home, as long as her heart remained within its walls.